Okay, so in my last video, we talked about art advice that I absolutely hate and do not like. So I thought that for this one, we would get into some of my favorite art advice. But first, let's talk about the art a little bit. Once again, I had to reuse footage, therefore we've got Cafe Hawthorne, because last time I did Cafe Hazel, and I still really love these. I actually want to do a whole series of sticker designs and put them up for sale on an online shop once I get one going, of different trace characters just in a cafe setting, just because I thought this was so cute. And I still love poor Hawthorne tripping and spilling the tea or coffee or whatever happens to be in that cup. I haven't decided. Regardless, this one's really cute and I like this. And I think that it's just a really good design. Quick note, I haven't really made any new art for a combination of different reasons. One is absolute burnout because of my job, making it hard for me to find time to both relax and draw at home. But also, like, I have gotten, and I still don't know how, I have gotten some kind of elbow injury. I'm working on new art. I've done a couple of doodles on paper that I want to turn into full pieces, but for right now, I'm having to reuse footage because of just lack of time, because job, and also my elbow injury, that because of my job, I keep restraining it because I have to pick things up. I have to get things off of shelves. Just the general motion of picking something up hurts and restrains it. And I've got a brace coming, hopefully today, and that should help. But that's been a big problem, and I don't really know how to mitigate it and how to fix it, because I don't even know what I did in the first place. But that's why there hasn't really been much new art on the channel. And now that we're done talking about that and giving you the lowdown of that, let's get back to the topic. So, some of my favorite art advice. We're going to start out with one that people have heard a lot, and it's one that I think is a good piece of advice. It's very useful, it's very helpful, and that is draw from your shoulder. Again, we've all heard this one, but the reasons why, or why I definitely suggest it, I don't always manage to, but it can allow you to have more confident and smooth lines, and if that's the kind of style you're going for, you should definitely use this technique as much as you can. Another major thing, though, the bigger thing, really, is that it can help you to avoid wrist injury and wrist strain, as well as a help to reduce the risks of carpal tunnel, which is something that as an artist we can end up dealing with that a lot and having struggles with carpal tunnel and issues. It's really hard to deal with those once they pop up. The best way to do it, essentially, it's one of those things, the best treatment is prevention, because the more that you can prevent it, the better off you'll be in the long run. So definitely drawing from the shoulder is useful, and I get that it can be hard to do all the time, especially because sometimes the most comfortable position to draw in has you sitting in a way that other people, normal people, would look at and be just perplexed as to how you could possibly be comfortable that way, but it is the most comfortable way to sit, and I understand that, and I get that you can't really use your shoulder for like tiny details, you have to use your wrist more for that. But I do think that drawing from your shoulder is one of those tips that when you can use it, use it. Use it as much as possible. Number 2, draw many thumbnails. I know that you guys don't see this particular tip in use on my channel a lot because I don't usually show the sketching process of my videos. And that's mostly because I stop and pause and have so many long pauses in the midst of my sketching, in the midst of my sketching process while I try and debate and level things out, that it's a pain in the neck to edit out the pauses. And also I can spend so long in the sketch process that the inking and coloring process may be like just a couple of hours. However, you throw the sketching process in there, we've got a 5+ hour set of footage at minimum, and that makes it a little bit harder to include. But I do prefer to use several thumbnails, and it's still a very important thing even though I don't show it as part of my process. Thumbnailing is a great way to explore ideas and maybe find ideas you wouldn't usually come to immediately. It lets you kind of push your creativity and make a little bit more progress and try things you otherwise wouldn't. But one of the biggest reasons that I love them, aside from that, is that I struggle a lot with composition and backgrounds and what should go where in a setting, and sometimes thumbnailing can help me get the gist of that out, at least in some form or another, at least in kind of a gestural way, to get everything ironed out at least basically, before I go into the full piece. It's a fantastic way to test and figure out your composition. And I don't know about you guys, but starting with an entire blank canvas is intimidating. That's actually one reason why, in the rare occasion that I do show my sketching process, my sketch, I zoom into the canvas a good bit and I go up in the corner where it feels like it's smaller and it's less intimidating, and I'll do a sketch there and then make it bigger before I go to fill in more details. So having a whole blank canvas is really intimidating, and if I do thumbnails, now sometimes this is harder to do, admittedly, because a lot of my thumbnails end up being done like in a couple of downtime minutes at work on paper. But if I'm doing my thumbnails digitally, I can take the thumbnail that I decide that I like for the piece and kind of blow it up, make it bigger. And then I have something to work off of instead of just this open, empty canvas that feels like just so much and makes everything feel overwhelming and intimidating. So number 3, you don't have to post every single thing you make. And I know that with the way social media is now, that sounds a little bit, like it might not be the best advice. But here's the thing. Sometimes, even though you might feel compelled to post every single thing you make, you really don't have to. Sometimes it is preferable to just keep things to yourself. Sometimes it's nice to have things that are just for you that you don't have to put out there. It's like I've seen some people compelled to put every single study they do of something up on their Twitter. And why? Those are something that's done just for you, and especially if you're not proud of it, you don't have to post it. If it's something that you want to keep to yourself, you don't have to post it. And I think that that's something that's important to reiterate and for people to know. But that does bring us to the next one, especially mentions of studies and sketches and stuff like that. The next one, I lost track of my numbers. This is number 4. Okay, that's what it is. Okay, number 4, flip your canvas. Please flip your canvas. If you're drawing traditionally, get a mirror, flip the paper over and hold it up to a window. Do something, get a light box, flip it, something. Flip your canvas. This is important. When you're drawing, your eyes are going to get used to things in the piece. This is little flaws, little things that might look wonky, but that you don't quite realize it because you've been staring at it for so long. If you flip the canvas, it gets a lot easier to spot the mistakes and things that you need to tweak and to fix. The way it works is because everything's now the opposite, it kind of tricks your brain into thinking you're looking at a different piece than you were before. So it makes it easier to spot things. I use this a lot during my sketching process, especially with faces and with the head shape, to make sure that I've got everything right. I flip it back and forth like crazy so that I can make sure that I'm getting things right, and that when I go to ink something, I don't have a weird sketch that needs a lot of fixing. And I actually recommend that even if you're sketching and flipping the piece while you're sketching, I recommend flipping it when you ink it as well, when you do the line art. At least for me, that has led to me spotting some mistakes that I missed during my sketching phase, just because I'd moved on from that particular part to something else, and it didn't come out as much until the other features in the drawing were present. So I would miss it, and then I'd go to do the inking on that part, and I'd be like, oh, okay, I need to fix that. That happens a lot, so I also recommend flipping your canvas when you do your line art. Now this one, number 5, was suggested by someone in my comment section on the last video, and that is to learn gesture drawing. This is one that I definitely think is very helpful, and it's one thing it can help you loosen up, and it can help you learn figure drawing a little bit more loosely so you can do it more quickly, which can help you map out poses and figure out how you want things to look and whether or not things might look a little bit too wonky, especially if you're looking at a reference and you do one, you're going to notice if your gesture drawing looks like, and looks weird. And I think it's a good practice, and it's also fantastic to do for warm-ups. It can loosen up your hand, get you in the mood for drawing, get your brain in the drawing mode, and it's a great warm-up to get you going. Now the next one, number 6, is learn about the principles of squash and stretch. This is one that I actually see come up most often in regard to animation, but it's something that's also very important for illustrations and still characters to add just that little bit more life to it, especially since you can see these principles at work in real life all the time. I'm going to use an example of my little on-screen avatar, should be in the bottom right there, kind of with holding up the hand and all that. Now, let me just say I used my own arms as an example of the character's arms, which is very important because I am a little heavier, so of course it's going to affect that. The way that it came out, the way that Squash and Stretch came out, is actually a little bit more so in regard to my forearms. When my arms are extended, even though I am a little heavier, they look very slim. My arms look very slim. But the second I bend my arm up, like my character, with part of the forearm getting squashed against the upper arm, it actually looks noticeably wider despite looking slim otherwise. That's actually why in my little character, because I used my own arms as a model, why the forearm looks so much wider, because it can make a significant difference even if the character themselves is very slim. And that's strictly because of skin and fat distribution. You bend your arm up, your forearm's going to get squashed against your upper arm. Even if it's only a little bit, there's still going to be a little bit of change. Another example, and this is again for something that will work for most people, to give you an idea of it, works for most people. Some people who are very skinny or they have mostly muscle, they may not get this as prominently, but another wonderful example is look at your own thighs when you sit down. Most, not all, people will see their thighs appear prominently wider when they sit down because they're getting squashed against what you're sitting on, and that skin and the other tissue has to go somewhere, so it goes kind of outward. Even if it's a little bit, it's still there, and it can be noticeable even in somebody who is very slender, like my sister Andy. It's just a natural part of the human body, and I think it's very fascinating. And of course, this applies to other parts of the body in general, other than just your forearms, your arms, and your thighs. But I actually think it's very useful and can add a little bit more life to characters, a little bit more interest and realism, even in heavily stylized work. Just that little bit of squash can be very interesting. That's why, like, with more cartoony characters, you'll see their cheek, they do like a big smile, their face crunches up, and you get that more of a prominent bump around the cheek because things are squashed. Or they do a ah kind of face and their face is stretched out more, so everything looks thinner and not as plump. And that's something that I think is a very important principle to learn. And again, I know it's pushed very much for animation, but I think it's important for still drawings and illustrations too. Now here's the next one, and I'm completely abandoning the numbers at this point because I talk so much in between them that I forget what number I'm on. Use references. Please use references. Please use references. They help. It's not cheating. Please use references. Using references can honestly help to elevate whatever piece you're working on. It's a matter of seeing how these things are in real life. No matter how much you've studied something, you still may have something that you might have missed, or a different angle on this than you've really seen before. A reference drawing can be very important and very helpful for managing things like that. And I think it's also important because, at least in my personal experience, using a reference can cause you to get a new idea that you maybe didn't have before. Just a new idea that pops up in your mind just from looking at this, and you're like, what if I use this like that? And it can be very helpful and very interesting to use. And it's just one of those things that I recommend no matter how long you've been drawing. I suggest using references. Now the next one. This one is one that I think is very interesting. Very interesting because I'd never thought about it before. Learn screen design. I heard this one in a video from the Starfish Face. I can't remember exactly which video. I watch her videos so much. But learning screen design is something that, especially if you're doing comics or sequential art, can be very important for readability and for making things clear. It's very interesting, like keeping characters on certain sides, especially if they're having a conversation. Make sure that if a character's running somewhere, you keep the direction of things consistent. Otherwise, things are going to get flipped around and not be as clear to the reader. And like I said, it's most important for things like comics and storyboarding and things like that. But I think it's just a general idea that might be able to help level up your abilities, even in still illustration. I think it can be very helpful. And like I said, I heard this one from the Starfish Face, and I very much recommend it. The next one is give yourself time to enjoy different media. You're allowed to watch and enjoy media that you really like, consume media you enjoy. Exposing yourself to your favorite media and stories can also help kind of refuel your inspiration and creativity tanks. Despite what people who aren't artists might think, we do not, as anybody who is an artist knows, we don't have an infinite well of inspiration and creativity. That's part of the problem with art block. We get those points where we're just run down and tired, and we can't think that great because our brains are just starved for inspiration. And sometimes, especially if you got inspired by a specific thing, maybe go back to it. If you're working on something that was inspired by something else or something else that made you want to create, go back to it. Refresh your mind. Give yourself a break to relax. Let yourself just enjoy a video game or a movie or a cartoon. It's not going to do much harm to take a break. Because if you don't, you're going to push yourself towards more burnout if you don't take a break every once in a while. Now, this one is one that I know everybody says. This is one that everybody says. And it's not fun advice, but it is good advice. At least I believe so. Step out of your comfort zone. Everyone says it. They say it for a reason, though. Practicing things you aren't used to or don't do a whole lot can help your weaknesses turn into strengths instead. Let's be real, if you go the whole time ignoring something that you don't want to learn how to draw, like I don't enjoy drawing backgrounds, I regret the amount of time that I avoided drawing backgrounds because of that. If you don't practice it, you're not going to get better at it. Now, do you absolutely have to be a jack of all trades when it comes to creating characters, illustrations, whatever kind of art you create, paintings, whatever, it doesn't matter. Do you have to be a jack of all trades? No. No, if you want to focus in on a niche, you focus in on a niche. You can do that if you want to. However, even somebody who is focusing in on a niche is going to have weaknesses a lot of times that they just avoid and don't do so that they don't have to do it. And if you do that, your weaknesses aren't going to get any stronger at all. It's one of those things. Now, looking at other tutorials, that does count if you're really paying attention. Because when you're watching other people do something, you will pick up on things, and that will help you improve. But it's very minuscule compared to actually doing it. You need to actually sit down and practice the things you're not used to, or the things that you don't enjoy. That's why I said this is not a fun piece of advice, but it is a good one, and one that is very useful, and that we should all use, and that I need to use more often. Now, getting down to the last one, at least in this video, I might have to do a follow-up, because there's actually a lot of really good art advice that I really like. There's some that I don't care much for, like in the last video, but there's more art advice that I do like and that I think is useful. So there might end up being a part 2 to this. But the final one that I have is let yourself explore and experiment. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself into one thing. Unless you're doing paid work, where a client expects something very specific, in a specific style, and all that, you're allowed to experiment. Playing around and taking time to play with trying new things might open a door that you didn't even know was there, let alone that it was closed. Like, seriously, this might unlock the hidden bookcase door to something that you find that you really enjoy. And I think it's worth experimenting and trying new things that just strike your fancy. That can be how people stumble into doing different kinds of art than they used to. That's how I fell into playing around with resin. That's how I fell into really wanting to play with sculpture, even though I don't have any space for it right now. That kind of thing is important, not just for finding new mediums, but even just for elevating your art. You might find a technique that looks really good with your style that you didn't even know existed before. And I think because of that, another element of that is letting yourself explore and look into the kind of things that other people do. What art tips do other people have that you maybe hadn't considered? What kind of things do they do different than you that maybe you want to play around with and do a style study? Now, that's one of those things. If you do a style study, don't post it and claim it's strictly yours. It's a style study. Make note of that. Please, please, please. Let's not have any more of the they copied me drama. I hate that stuff. Especially when one party is acting in bad faith and doesn't want to admit that they are. So I do think that that's extremely important to look into new mediums, new techniques, and just people that you maybe hadn't considered before with everything and the things that they do. So for right now, for this video, that is all of the favorite art advice that I have in this one. And these are ones that I do think are very good. They may not work for everybody. It's one of those things, art advice is not ever going to be one size fits all. That said, what do you guys think? Are there any ones that you really like that I may have missed or just may not have really heard before? Because I'd really love to hear them, because new art advice is always useful and always helpful, and I really like hearing it. So all I ask is, again, like in the last video, please be civil in the comments. Suggest things that you want to suggest, but just don't argue with each other, please. And I want to know what you guys have heard or what art advice you have for other people. Because I think that's something I find really fascinating about art. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's one that I want to touch on. Something I love about art is that there is no way to avoid being influenced by, you can't avoid being influenced by anything at all. There's no way. There's no way. You're going to be influenced by some things, whether it's something you've seen in real life, in passing. And in a way, that's just something that makes art so beautiful to me. Because no matter what you do, it's a collaborative effort in some way or another, because you're always influenced by something else. It's this very fascinating element of unintentional collaboration that comes up that I think is just very fascinating and very beautiful. And it's one of the things that makes me happy and why I like seeing other people's art advice. And why I like seeing what tips and tricks someone else may have that might help someone. It just further expands on the collaborative properties of art as a whole. And I think it's very interesting. But now that I've gone off on the little side tangent, thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much to my patrons, Inside Chaos, Salmon, and Creativa Artly. And I appreciate all of you so much for watching and for being here. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Bye!